My name is Brandon Douglas, and I'm a second semester radio student here at NAIT. I'm no wizard when it comes to editing or taking videos or even being in front of the camera, but where I feel most at home is in studios like this, whether it be behind this mic or running this control board behind me. That's where I feel my skill sets really shine through. And as a matter of fact, in this very room every Thursday, I host, edit, and produce a podcast where I get the chance to talk about sports for just over an hour with a couple of my peers. And that's exactly what I want to do for a career in this industry, is talk about sports. So I sat down with Jason Gregor, the host of his own show on TSN 1260 here in Edmonton, and talked to him about his rise to his career and what he thinks has helped him get there. So I hope you enjoy it. I had a lot of fun putting it together. Owner, operator, host of your own show, claim your writer, generous philanthropist in the community, but kind of before all that, a radio student at NAIT, and before even that, just a kind of good old small town Alberta kid. A legend in your own right in pretty much every sense. Jason Gregor, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me today. I really appreciate it. To start, going back to those kind of rural roots, you grew up around New Sarepta, correct?
Yes.
So you might not have kind of known it at the time, I guess. I know I didn't. Kind of the things you learn about growing up in an environment like that. Looking back, do you think that there were any kind of like life skills or maybe even some perspective that you gained having your formative years in that environment that kind of helped you carve out this pretty incredible career that you've had for yourself? Because I mean, realistically, there's not a lot of direct correlation between, you know, forking out a calving pen and being live on the radio, or, you know, being shoulder deep in a yearling heifer and selling commercials for your show. Like, to the naked eye, there's not a lot of direct comparisons there, but do you think that there were some?
Well, I got my work ethic from the farm, 100%. My parents, like, I look back on it now, and you just, like, Sundays was a day off at the farm, but the other days you pretty much worked, and it didn't matter, you know, as I got older and, you know, 16, 17, 18, when I'm driving, and, you know, now you start to go out, and, you know, the rule, my parents, I never had a curfew. They were just like, you basically select your own curfew. And I learned the hard way a few times because you'd stay out late, and then 7 o'clock comes on Saturday, and guess what? You're up. And, you know, my parents that wasn't really negotiable. When you grow up in that environment, you're used to working hard. And so I'm a big believer in any walk of life. The hardest workers are usually the ones who have the most success. Like, Connor McDavid doesn't get outworked by anybody in hockey. He's obviously got great talent, but he works at his craft all the time. And, you know, I look at my career, like, for me, when I started out and, you know, I was doing everything. And I still kind of run a lot of aspects of my company, and I just didn't really know any different. I was just like, well, I got to do it, because if I don't do it, it's not going to get done.
Does that stem from, you think, like, wanting to kind of not have to answer to somebody at the end of the day, just answering to yourself? Or maybe you're just like a sucker for punishment in terms of, you know, putting in that much work into something?
You know what? I loved what I was doing, so there's lots of times I never really felt like work. You know what? It was, like I talked earlier, I think my parents just instilled, like, I had a natural belief in myself. You know, I read a lot of books, and, you know, I read some books about successful people. Successful people, one of the traits is, like, they believe they're better than others, and not in an arrogant way. I know my biggest strength. I'm not good at creating, like, false hype. That's not my strength. My strength is interviewing people and researching stats, right? And I'm like, people aren't going to outwork me on those things.
And so now, kind of jump ahead to today, 20 plus years in the business. You foster and grow these relationships with both people inside these organizations and the players themselves. I mean, you interact with them on almost a day-to-day basis, right?
Yeah.
How do you toe that line of being, you know, friendly with them and having those relationships, but still wanting to provide kind of honest, above-board coverage where you're not, you know, sugarcoating things? It's like, how do you kind of balance that out without, you know, burning bridges and stuff like that?
Yeah, I've always been the believer that just be honest. Pro sports, to be a professional athlete, you're like the top 0.001%. I was never one who would, I don't like to go for like the low-line fruit insults. Oh, nobody in the NHL is terrible. I've never called a player terrible. Now, you might make a terrible decision once or twice on the ice. It's totally different. So I always felt that as long as you were fair, because the truth is, if the player played bad, if I said it, it was like, oh yeah, thanks, Einstein. They already know, right? So to me, it was more so try to make you know, rational analysis about it. I don't really, and that's probably hurt me at times, because, you know, like, that's not me. I couldn't, I couldn't go, over the top, right? So that's going to limit you. You kind of have to be honest to yourself. And I always wanted to stay true to, I was like, you know what? I have no problem criticizing players as long as I do it in a way that's respectful.
And you said it's a really demanding industry, especially right at the start when you are trying to get that foothold. And sometimes your personal life and maybe even a social life do sometimes take that back seat. So for you personally, did you have to stop yourself and say, okay, I've got a foothold in the industry. Now I can kind of take a little bit of a step back to make time for that personal life? I mean, here we are now, like your wife, your son, your dog, this beautiful home you've welcomed us into. Did it all come together pretty naturally for you, or did you have to take a moment of self-reflection and say, I need to kind of stop and make a life to go along with this living that I've created for myself?
That's a good question. I was comfortable being single for a long time because I always knew when I first started my company, I was like, hey, if I got to be committed, if I have to make a choice at that point, it's going to be my company. That's just a fact. So I never got into a relationship because of it, any serious one anyway. I didn't make like a massive conscious effort, but it was more so like I just didn't party as much, if I'm being bluntly honest, right? Like I had a great run, I had lots of fun, but you can't live that lifestyle forever. So I've learned to find a healthy balance. You can't take your foot off the pedal though, or you'll get passed, right? So I've learned how to maximize my time better.
When talking about sports becomes a job and no longer just a hobby you're doing with your buddies after half a dozen cold beers on Friday night, how do you keep that passion for covering it going for this long of a stretch?
Well, I think the big reason was because I would always cover lots of other sports, right? So when I was doing my show, I was also doing junior football play-by-play, and I was doing junior A. And so it kind of kept you didn't just get focused on one thing. In the summertime, we don't talk about the 6th round pick 4 days in a row. Like we'll have different themes some weeks on different topics. And some days you just talk about just guy stuff, right? Or human interest stuff that I think your audience relates to. You can get into real serious food debates on a sports show with guys. It's hilarious.
Especially Struddy and banana bread takes, right?
Stuff like that. Like I feel sorry for him. He's got no palate. It's kind of odd. There's still very few days out of the year. Like I consider myself extremely blessed. I would tell anybody, when you can find a job you're passionate about, it doesn't really feel like work.
Awesome. Well, Jason, thanks so much. Again, I really appreciate taking the time to kind of sit down and chat with me. I've been a big fan of yours for pretty much since I first moved to Edmonton, and I didn't even know that TSN 1260 existed, moving here at 18 years old from the sticks.
Well, thanks for that. I appreciate the kind words.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason.
Jason talked a lot about hard work during that interview, and that's something I could really relate to, having grown up on a family farm myself. Hard work is something that I've taken with me everywhere I've gone in life and undoubtedly will continue to as I move forward. My name is Brandon Douglas, and I can't wait to start my career in radio.